Hey guys, and welcome back. So we're going to take this opportunity to explain some advanced meshing technique that we use, and even though this sim we're not going to render the mesh itself, we're going to primarily render the whitewater. We're going to use this to show how we can deal with a complex sim that has a lot of it could cause a lot of issues when we try to mesh it. And let's copy this. Let's create a new node. Call this splash mesh. And I'm gonna go over the existing toolset in Houdini and what we're going to do, and then talk about our workflow to create the meshes. Okay, so the first thing, we're going to use the particle fluid surface, which is designed to pretty much work with this data, with this type of information. And if we connect this node right away and leave the settings as they are, the default settings, we're going to get a mesh directly. And the default mode is what it's doing is it's unpacking the points and then meshing those points. Okay, we have to match the particle scale, of course, which will increase the resolution, and we can lower the voxel scale from 0.75 to 0.7 or 0.6 to get more details, but this could easily start to give us more flickering in the mesh. So we have to be very careful with that. I set this to 0.03, and let's see how the mesh looks like. Calculating, it first generates a VDB from those from the points, and then we convert that into a volume. This node also takes care of transferring any velocity, verticity, or any other attributes. So as you can see, by setting the same particle scale, we're getting a lot of crazy details. Well, it's not interesting really. We have to increase the particle separation to get rid of these floating points and start meshing them properly. So let's increase this to 0.5. And it's calculating. It's going to be faster, obviously. But I want to run it real time and show you guys how much it takes. So we're getting something better now, and as you can see, these values are working maybe here, but not so much here. We can still squeeze in more details, and then we have all these things that they're going to cause a lot of flickers. And the main reason for flickering, what's happening is when we mesh this, when we have this mesh, it's trying to connect these set of points together, and then this point, for example, is going to get close here, so this group is going to try and add it with them and generate a mesh, and then this point will move to a different place, which will tear apart quickly that mesh, and that's going to start the flickering issue. So this is pretty much the default settings. I can lower this, but I can tell you that to increase the resolution of the volume field, but I can tell you this technique is not going to lead us anywhere. So this, you're not going to be able to easily get a stable mesh with this node. So this is the first method to convert the points or the flip into a mesh, is to take the points, generate a VDB field, which is happening internally, and then convert that into a volume. The other thing that we could do is if we isolate this. So this node has a surface field, velocity field, and these two are volumes. It also has points that are packed. And let's isolate the surface field. That's a volume. And right now it's set to hidden. We're not seeing it. I'm going to use a primitive node and go under volume and then adjust visualization. I'm going to change this to isosurface, and boom, now we have something visible. And this is the volume field that has been used in the sim by the flip solver to calculate the pressure and solve all the equations that it needs to figure out. So this is how the sim is happening under the hood. This data we could easily convert into a volume. So if I put down a VDB, into a mesh, this is a volume, this is a surface field. If we put down a VDB convert this into polygons, you can see already that we're getting a very we're getting a mesh. Whether it's a perfect mesh or not, we're not sure yet. But if we compare this with the points data, you can see we're losing a lot of details. We're losing a lot of points, especially here. We're not getting anything. Okay, so the way there is an interaction between the volume sim, the fluid sim, or the smoke sim inside the flip, and the particles. They're not always in sync. So we could have volume in specific areas, and then the particles are trying to behave accordingly to that velocity field, but they're not necessarily enclosed in that SDF. And so in this occasion, in this example, we have a lot of points that are not inside the SDF, and so we're not meshing all of those. They're not included at all. And this method is actually very, very useful if we want to generate a quick preview of the sim. So if I'm just changing frame, you can see right away that we're getting a preview. Okay, it's really, really fast. It's actually the fastest method to get a mesh. And the good thing about this, the mesh is not going to be really high res, but we can get a very stable mesh that doesn't have a lot of flickering. That's a nature of this surface field. Now, this method, this technique is also available in this node. So if I switch to particle and compressed fluid surface, this one, compressed fluid surface, you can see it's identical. And so this is another option that we can use to convert the surface field into a mesh, and we pretty much have the same setting. This is what's happening under the hood. So these two options, the surface polygon soup and these two, are what's available through this node. But as you can see, if we wanted to capture all the details, we'd have to use the particle fluid surface, and let's do that. The surface polygon soup, we can use surface polygon. The soup is just lighter on memory, that's all. So in order for us to capture all the details, we need to use this method that works with the particles. But once we apply this, there is no good settings to there's no right setting to properly capture all the details of the sim. If we use a particle separation that is too low to capture all the details, it's going to introduce flickering in the slow moving parts. And when we have a lot of fluids, or let's say a flat surface, it's going to introduce bump and flickering there. If we use a bigger radius, we're going to lose all the fine details that are in the separated sections like this. So we're basically going to lose the splash. So we need a way to work with these two sections separately. The other thing that we have to remove or separate is the droplets. Now, let's wait for this. Remember, we turned on droplets detection. What this does is, if a point is getting separated from the sim, it will be flagged as droplet. Okay, so right now there's a lot of droplets in this sim, and that includes this point, this point, this point, all of it. Okay, all these guys, anything that is not within anything that doesn't have a reasonable amount of neighbors, it's going to be considered as droplets. And when that happens, you don't want to be meshing those guys. You don't want to be meshing those points. You would want to separate them and either render them as spheres or remove them or do something. You don't want to include them because they're actually the cause of the flickering. Okay, so let's do that. I'm gonna cancel this guy. let's separate the droplets. So we have an attribute here. Let's unpack the points first. And I'm gonna go to a previous frame so it's lighter to work with. So we have unpacked points and we have droplet. And I'm gonna say if droplet is higher than 0.1, I want to delete the points. And there we go. Now we have a very tight particles. Everything that has reasonable amount of neighbors is present, anything else is not. And if we look closer, it's actually we're not losing details, we're getting rid of the bad points. Okay, that all this stuff is what's going to cause or be the primary cause for the flickering. So we removed that right away. Okay, let's create what's happening inside this node. So what's actually happening is we're using a VDB from particle fluid, which will have the same options. If you look here, that's the same options inside this node, the same UI. So we want to create a surface field from these points. And now I'm going to use 0.03 to match the particle scale, particle separation that I had. And we can lower the voxel scale to 0.6 to increase the detail, also lower the influence scale to 2 to basically reduce how much it blends the points together, or the mesh between the points together. Let's reduce this to 2. So it's a volume field. The SDF is lighter, is going to be heavier. So actually I'm going to set this a bit bigger because we're getting a lot of separation now. So let's try 0.05. Okay, so maybe 0.05 works here. Let's try 0.6. Let's see, not very different, but right now you see this value here worked great for these regions, for anything that is separating. Okay, pretty much here and here, but all this stuff is not, it's not working pretty well. I don't like all this bumpiness, so let's try something bigger for and see how it works here. Cool, so it looks like it's better with a bigger range. And maybe here, I think the sim was cached not using 0.03. Yeah, because I like these details. So let's try this. Let's try 0.075. I like how it looks here. And maybe this is what we will use. Okay, so I like all the fine details with this value here, but I'm not happy with this. All this has a lot of noise. So let's copy this guy, this node, and tweak or change this value until we hit a reasonable surface smoothing on these guys, on these areas. And let's see, maybe a bit higher, 0.1. Okay, so maybe let's try 7.5, and let's increase the influence scale. And remember, we're still working on with an SDF. So yeah, we're gonna use these values for anything around here, and I'm gonna use a VDB convert. So let's take a look at this, how it looks as a surface. So that's our surface, looks pretty good. And let's take a look at this surface here. So this looks pretty good as well in these areas. Okay, so the trick is, how can we blend these two so that when we can use this value for this part and then this value for this part? Well, if we go back, if we go back here, and I'm gonna copy this node, and let's take a look at the points. Actually, it's here. So if we look at the points, you can see the blue areas is where we don't need a lot of details, and then anything that is white is where we want to use a smaller radius. And so we're going to use this information to separate the points. Let's dive inside. I'm going to take this and bind export it as let's call it area attribute. Okay, it's a float, and I'm going to use a blast node to separate. So let's say if mask is if area is higher than 0.2, for example, I want to delete the points. Okay, let's try 0.5. Cool. So if we set this to 0.5, you can see we're getting all the fine details. Okay, and if we do the inverse, we're getting everything else that doesn't need a lot of smoothing. So the trick is, we're gonna first delete all the droplets and then use this technique and separate the points. Okay, so this area, we're gonna use the high-res settings. Sorry, this is the high-res settings. Okay, and then this part, we're going to use the bigger radius to get a smooth surface. Cool. And let's convert both of these into volumes. So this is a volume, this is a mesh of the slow moving parts, and the other one is of the fast moving parts, and let's merge them together. So if we do this, we get a really weird connection between the two. And this method is not going to work. So what we need to do is we need to merge the volumes themselves. We need to merge the SDF, the science distance field, and we can do that using a VDB combine. And we need to change this mode to SDF union. If we do that, it's going to nicely blend in the two. And we can even go maybe higher here. Let's try 0.05. I think this frame by itself, we still don't have a lot of separation in the particles, so if we go further and take a look at the splash, we're going to get more details. But let's try something higher. And let's see, and then we don't need two combines, we just need one. So if we do VDB convert, you can see we're getting a very nice transition between the two. So let's pick a different frame. It's obviously going to be slower. And look, if we look at the width droplets, look how much details we're removing. And this is this is like the secret to getting the proper mesh, and then this. Okay, so let's see. This is the... Now, when we convert this to a VDB, it's going to create a domain and basically make a bigger volume, bigger domain, and that's going to be slower. Even if we have less points here, it's going to consume more space. So the VDB data could be bigger, the VDB domain could be bigger. Even though it's sparse, it may be slower because it has to solve a bigger domain. So if we take a look at that now, and let's convert, I'd like to convert each section so I can see the mesh before we combine them together. VDB convert. And polygon soup. And that's our mesh. Okay, let's combine them together. and we're getting a really nice sheet of water here. Let's try the same setting. If we were to do it on both, on all of them, so let's wait for this to finish. I just wanted to show the result by default. Yeah, so you can see how much flickering we're gonna get now, and let's convert this into a mesh. And yeah, that's what we're gonna get, even without the droplets. If we include the droplets, I'm gonna disable this. If we include the droplets, it's gonna look terrible. It's gonna be much slower as well. But I want to show you guys. I'll probably have to pause for this. Yeah, I'll pause quickly because I think it's very important to see the result. I'll pause and then pick up in a second. So it took about 1.5 minutes for it to finish, and this is the result. This is how it looks like. Yep. Okay, so let's go back to our production quality setup. And actually I'm not gonna wait for this node. I only care about the combination now. So I'm gonna directly plug it into this, and it's gonna use the two different nodes here, combine them, and that's the mesh that we're gonna use. Now, if you care too much about the droplets or have specific needs for them, I can think of something at the moment, but let's say you wanted to keep them in. But actually, let's talk about the mesh first. So this is the result from the two parts combined together. You can see we're capturing all the splash, and we're also having a really nice surface here. And it's much faster than all the other options available. Now, if we wanted to do to capture even more details, we can, let's introduce some adaptivity. Now, this SDF is pretty smart. So if we set this to 0.05, you see it reduced the polygon count from let's see, from when, from where, from 1.4, 1.5 to 1. Okay, so almost 30% savings, and the mesh is not going to look very different. It knows where to place the polygons based on the curvature of the SDF, of the science distance field. Okay, so so if we wanted to capture more details, we could treat this surface and add a peak, for example, and move it along the normals. So let's set this to minus 0.01. Let's try 0.05. You can see it's peaking in. Okay, see it's pushing the points along the inverted normals, and that's gonna give this nice peak. So it depends on the look of the mesh that you want. Okay, now if you care too much about the droplets, I'm gonna copy this node, delete not selected, and we have a lot of droplets. Let's go back to this frame. So if you want the droplets, and maybe let's just keep, yeah, let's keep that. We can create a sphere, copy to points, and pack. And we can copy an actual sphere to those points. Let's set this to 0.05, 0.1, 0.25. You could render the points as spheres. It really depends on what you need them for. If you wanted to capture some highlights or I don't know what, you can use this technique. And let's see the surface in a different frame as well. Yep, so that's our surface, looking pretty good. And that's all the stuff, all the droplets that we don't need. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the surfacing. And the last thing we need to do is we need to transfer the velocity and any other attributes that we care about. So we can do that using a transfer node, attribute transfer. Oh, come on. I'm gonna transfer from the points. We don't need the droplets. I need the velocity. I don't need the droplets, and I need the vorticity. And done. Now let's peek this. Now if we copy this node, the visualizer, and plug it in here, we should get the